Welcome to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for people like you who care about the social impact of conscious companies and everyday heroes. Hear inspiring stories from those who put people and planet before profit and personal gain. You'll learn how you can make a difference, vote with your dollars, and get involved today. Here's your host, Karina Belizzi.
Hello, fellow do-gooders and friends. I'm your host, Karina Belizzi, an activist and cause marketer that's passionate about social impact and sustainability. Today, I invite you on a journey to discover one of the many applications of algae and how replacing a traditional petrochemical with an algae byproduct creates greener products that you use every day. It's an interesting, thoughtful journey that starts with one man's passion for algae and his wandering mind while we explore the greeting card aisle. Now, before I introduce our guest, if you haven't already, please rate, review, and subscribe wherever you listen. This will help us reach more people and spread more social good. And to amplify the collective good we are creating together, visit caremorebebetter.com. There you'll find an action page featuring social impact businesses and causes you can support. You can also keep the show ad-free by becoming a patron. Just visit caremorebebetter.com and click the donate button. Now, as we get started today, I have a question for you. Have you ever had a problem that you just felt compelled to solve? Today, we get to hear one such story. I'm joined by Scott Fulbright, co-founder and CEO of Living Ink, an ink company that harnesses the waste stream of algae producers to create a sustainable and even carbon-negative ink that can be used in screen printing, on paper, on textiles, greeting cards, and even integrated into durable materials like cell phone cases. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like you to start by telling us about your background. What landed you in the world of algae and how you first stumbled on the idea of making ink out of algae?
Born and raised in Michigan, and Michigan has a lot of inland lakes, so spent a lot of time playing around in sailboats and pedal boats, and there was always algae. So I've always been exposed to the outdoors and nature and plants and, specifically algae. In college, I actually got a job, and we were studying why algae blooms would occur. In the spring, you go down the Gulf of Mexico, there's these huge algae blooms. So we were trying to understand basically how to stop those algae blooms from occurring. As I was driving up from the field work in Florida, I kind of thought about the problem here is that algae are so productive, they grow so fast in these blooms out in the ocean. Can we harness that material for something good, like biomaterials or advanced materials that we all can use? And so, really in college is when I started to think about these ideas. And then I went to grad school, worked really hard in the laboratory, writing, reading, just trying to think, how can we make algae into like a tangible product that can really benefit the world? As you mentioned in your intro, when I left the lab one day, I went to the grocery store to buy a greeting card for my grandma. And, I was just sitting there and I just, when I saw a greeting card, I said, it's paper and ink, and then that's when the wheel started to turn of, what is ink? And I'd already seen that there was really beautiful algae out in the world. And so that's when these kind of connecting the dots of, hey, can we turn beautiful algae into different colors for ink? And so that's kind of the roundabout way I got going down the path. And here we are 7 years later with real tangible product and customers.
Now, question for you. I mean, when you think about ink is often made of petrochemicals, right? So is that the source of most of the carbon black ink that we're used to seeing?
Yeah. So if you look around your office or your home right now, your computer monitor, if that's black, or ink on anything that's black, rubber, what makes rubber black is carbon black. It's a little tiny chunk of carbon basically made by burning petroleum. So I think of big factories that just have this input pipe of petroleum. It's just burned, and that's how we get carbon black. And then you can put it into all these different applications. So it's all from petroleum. There's really no other alternatives. And so there's a large carbon footprint there. And that's kind of what we're replacing in both ink and other applications.
So in my office, I'm looking at my black microphone and my black painted microphone stand and my black monitor and my black monitor stand. I mean,
headphones.
The headphones are black. Your glasses look like they're black.
Exactly.
the ink that I'm writing out of my pen with. I mean, literally all of these things are petrochemicals.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy.
The plastic, the color. And, I think I was in grad school and I started to get really kind of interested. And I just started to look around the world and I just started to ask, where does everything come from? Every day, think about how many things we're exposed to. I woke up, I brushed my teeth. So I took the toothpaste, I put it on the plastic bristles that was on the plastic handle. I became kind of obsessed with just thinking about where everything came from. And then I also was kind of obsessed with algae. And so I said, how can we make something that is scalable, that's cost effective, that, that can start to replace some of these? Because, my take is people will say, is this the future? And, my answer is it has to be, because we know that petroleum is a finite material. We know that we will run out at some point. Maybe it's in our lifetime, maybe it's, a couple generations away, but at some point we need alternatives to basically every material that's on my desk right now, from my plastic bottle to my mouse to the black in my headphones.
That's crazy. Okay. So I was listening to a newer podcast just yesterday called Smartless. And it's got Jason Bateman and a couple of other people that are hosting. Will Arnett, I think, is one of the guests. And they had Neil deGrasse Tyson on. Neil deGrasse Tyson basically made the point that if your mind isn't blown every week, you're doing something wrong. So when I heard you tell me that carbon ink was basically in everything from my cell phone case to my headphones, I had that mind blown moment. I thought about it a little bit more. I thought about petrochemicals. I thought about all of the pieces of my car that are made from plastic, that are made from petrochemicals, that include that carbon black. I also thought about the fact that most of the oil on this planet was actually once algae. Mm-hmm. And so it's like this full circle problem that we're kind of talking about. Let's talk for a moment about how you get ink out of the algae, because I think consumers listening to this might be thinking, heck, I've seen red algae, I've seen green algae, I've heard about these red algae blooms off the coast that are killing fish populations and things like that. So what exactly is it, and how do you turn it into ink?
Yeah, it's a great question, and something that we're working on every day. But, really at our company, Living Ink, there's really two major projects. One is developing these colors. So we can develop, using molecular biology techniques, or just going out into nature, finding, like you said, red algae that exists, or going to a hot spring here in Colorado and seeing, I've seen yellow hot springs algae. So, you can start to kind of extract that from nature and start to kind of, domesticate it and use it for your own good. We've got this project looking at colors. We've also got the second project is doing this kind of bio-based black. So replacing all the black in ink, like you said, or headphones and things like that. And really the core of what we're doing is we're still using a lot of similar materials that are out there, but what we're replacing, and I think we're one of the few companies doing this in the world, is actually trying to make a bio-based pigment. We've developed a purple strain of algae in our laboratory. We can put it into a kind of a basic ink formulation and print it. And when you look at that print, what you're looking at is literally just algae cells. So the algae kind of build up these different colors inside of them. And we actually use that algae as a pigment. Traditionally, that purple pigment would be synthesized or, made from petroleum. So, we're really replacing all of the pigments, both black and colors, is kind of the big goal of the company. So using the entire algae, and, just to talk about why algae is great because nature's already made these really physically small organisms. So if people don't know algae, it's basically like an aquatic plant, but they're really tiny, as you know, Karina, because you've worked in that industry. But in some ways, it kind of makes it difficult to work with. But when we started to look at this green algae powder or purple algae powder, we said, these are really nice pigments. They're really colorful. They're really already small to work with. And we can kind of put that into these ink formulations compared to, let's say, a plant which has a red leaf, that's a big red leaf, and you have to extract things, you got to break it down. So algae are nice because they're really small and they're diverse. There's a lot of colors out there. So those are some of the reasons why we love algae. Now,
you spoke about algae as a living organism. I mean, it's a living plant, single cell. That's some microalgae that we're talking about here. I mean, heck, seaweed and larger algae are referred to as macroalgae. Algae as a group of organisms are responsible for more than half of the oxygen that we breathe every day.
Yeah. So I would say take a deep breath, and then that's algae out in the ocean and things like that are allowing us to actually breathe that oxygen. So it's amazing when you think about it.
So when I looked at how you first got your company name, Living Ink, I think it probably is a reflection of that first project or an early project you did where you actually built a greeting card that looked plain when you opened it and then an image appeared.
Yep.
Can you talk about that? I mean, I know this may not be commercially available, but it's just really kind of incredible.
We were calling it kind of similar to like a chia pet. You know, remember like a chia pet that would actually grow like over time? Like it was like a little ceramic thing. You could put little seeds on it and grow. And basically what we were doing is like using algae as kind of like a little micro garden. So what we could do is we call it like a greenhouse, but we could send you a card. And on day one, it would say maybe happy birthday. You'd put it either underneath a lamp or by a window with sunlight. And on day 2, a cake would show up. And day 3, candles on the cake would show up. And then day 4, it would say, happy birthday from Scott. So we could actually kind of control that messaging by using these little tiny, again, little algae cells. And the whole idea there was that we would dilute them down so that you couldn't really see them with your eye because they're so small. But algae grow so fast that you give them 24 hours of light and they start to multiply. And then all of a sudden you start to see that the algae growing, and that's what would kind of communicate the message. So really fun project to get going. And I think really kind of connected some people with this creativity and kind of combining science and innovation into kind of a tangible product that they could see. So it was super fun and complex at the same time.
Well, I think that was another mind-blown moment for me because I was thinking about algae from what I knew about it and thinking, how does the algae survive on the paper without water or whatever to keep it going? And I really didn't have an answer for that. So, I mean, the fact that you're able to do this even with just a simple little project is quite interesting. How did you do that?
We had this little greenhouse that we'd put it in. So the paper would be sitting there with a little bit of moisture, because you're right, algae needs moisture. But we were also looking at ways to kind of micro-encapsulate the algae so that you'd keep them like in a little sphere. So you could keep them alive over time, but they would still continue to grow and get denser and show more color. So that was part of kind of the technology that we were developing. And, we really took that through. We did a crowdfunding campaign and, we took it through kind of product development. The whole time we were learning like what to do and what not to do. 1, when you start a company, and 2, develop a product. One of the things that really kind of drove us to doing what we're doing now is like, we wanted to really like get into like the commodity chemical space, because that's where we know like there's an impact there. So, we still have kind of fun plans to do these kind of growing ink projects and things like that. But first, we're kind of like trying to really make an impact on some of these kind of petrochemical industries that you brought up early on.
Yeah. So I know you've probably done way more research around inks and carbon black and usage in that particular marketplace than I ever will. So I'm just curious if you have some like top line statistics for us, like how much ink is used every day or every month, and how much are you able to replace at the current time with your production with an algae sourced, more sustainable, even carbon negative product?
About 9 billion pounds of ink is produced worldwide. And that can be anything from screen printing ink on your shirt to billboard ink to your pen ink. So pretty broad industry. It's about a $25 billion industry too. So it's pretty significant. Right now we are replacing just a very small amount of that. But, I will say that we're working with some of the largest brands in the world, which has really blown my mind that we've been able to kind of get some of these really large apparel companies and consumer good companies to actually work with us and kind of introduce us to some of their printers or converters. And really, not only think about doing small projects with us, but really thinking big. Like in the next couple of years, we want to convert all of our black ink into this algae ink. So right now, to answer your question, we're still down below 0.1% there of the overall market. But I do think that we've got a pathway to really kind of make an impact at scale with some of these groups we're working with.
Are there any big brands that are openly talking about this to, engage their consumer spheres that, hey, we're making these products from algae ink?
Not a surprise here, but Patagonia was one of the first early adopters of doing projects with us and demonstrating that they could introduce us to their printer, that the product worked, that there was a good story there and it was sustainable. So we'll be doing a lot of packaging with Patagonia this year. And they've kind of led the way in terms of kind of validating that the technology works. And, now we've had several other large brands kind of follow it behind, which they'll be doing launches, so I can't name them, unfortunately. But yeah, it's some of the biggest brands in the world. So really exciting. But also, I think Patagonia, what I learned through this process is that nobody really wants to be first, because like when you go to an unknown technology or a small company, there are unknowns. There's, printers haven't printed with this product before. So, I think Patagonia just demonstrated a little bit of leadership to take a leap of faith and say, let's do this. And now when we talk to, some of their competitors or other CPG companies, they say, if they can do it, then I guess we can do it. So
yeah, like, you got Patagonia, right?
Yeah, exactly. What we learned is that everybody wants to be second or third. So, even, Patagonia is now a pretty big company, but even like, 5-10 years ago, they were relatively small, I think, in terms of, the Nikes and Adidas and Pumas of the world. Just by having their leadership and taking some of those leaps of faith, they are kind of pushing supply chains into these directions of sustainable materials from what we've learned.
Yeah, well, I wonder too, because there has been almost a consumer movement, it seems, towards something that is more sustainable in its look and feel. So you're seeing more branding that is craft-based packaging without a lot of flood coating and simple black ink on it. So I wonder if that also is benefiting you.
Definitely. I think the trends right now, one of our advisors worked at Hewlett Packard for their career, and they said that if you were doing this 10, 15 years ago, you wouldn't have a chance in this ink market. Right now, they said, I think you guys can be a leader in this space in the coming years because of, mostly the consumer trends, which are pushing the brands, which then push their partners and printers to do things differently. So I've been more excited than ever in the last 12 months in terms of how many brands are coming to us saying, we want to use this. We want to find a way to work with you. So yeah, it's been really exciting. And there's a lot of hope there, I think.
Yeah, I know. I think a few years ago when I first came across you, I think it was at an algae technology summit or something in Arizona, if I remember correctly. At any rate, at the time I was like, well, you don't have color yet. So that would be a real problem with this project. And now I'm looking from a different lens and I'm like, a single color, like just going black and the simplicity of it. I mean, that could be just fine. And, you see all these direct to consumer brands doing single color monochrome outer packaging that they're shipping around and developing brands and identity around that. So I think there's a space for it now and almost a new way, because over the last 5 years, I think consumers have gone a little more simplistic in their desires too. At the same time, I think there are some beautiful pigments that can come out of what you're doing. So I look forward to staying tuned on that.
The black was very fun and exciting originally. Now, as we're scaling that up, it's still fun and exciting, but it's black and black is black, which a lot of people use black, like you're right. But yeah, when we start getting into these color projects, it is just interesting from a curiosity standpoint and from just a beauty standpoint. It's quite beautiful what nature can actually produce color-wise.
If you have a vision for what this company can do over the course of the next few years to change how people are using ink in a market where potentially more is moving virtually, less is being printed at home on printers and things like that. I mean, where do you see your impact growing and going over the next few years?
Yeah, I think we're really interested in like apparel. So shirts, footwear, clothing. I think there's a lot there because I think that when people wear clothes, I think it says something about them typically, right? Like you might wear a shirt for 10 years or 5 years, whatever people's preferences are. But, what we found is that clothing is really interesting because it's like a talking point. Like I got some shoes from Adidas a few years ago that were from ocean plastic. And I just thought they were so cool. Like, it was like, I'd like to talk about it because I'm not like bragging about my shoes, but just being like, isn't this cool that this is happening right now? Like that there's people pulling out a waste material and putting it onto my feet. So we like clothing. I think packaging is one of the growing markets within ink because there's just a lot more packaging being done around the world. The other interesting area that we've started to explore is like even like pen ink. When we tell people that, would you want to be like in your, writing in your journal rather than laying down, chunks of petroleum on your paper, you could lay down pieces of algae in your material that could actually write your story. So that seems to get people excited if they can actually use it. Those are kind of some of the markets that we're really interested in right now. One of the things that I've learned is just that it's like an educational thing, right? Like we talked to some of the big brands a couple of years ago and I'd say, what kind of ink do you use? And they're like, I have no idea. I have never thought about ink. I've never thought about pigments. And so when I looked at their packaging, let's just say a shoe company, I'm like, your shoebox is literally cardboard and ink. That's all it is. Cardboard, there's 100% recycled now. There's some cool products coming on the market. My whole point is, let's tell some stories. Let's take this other material like ink, which has really not been thought about, and including you and I, even 7 years ago, I didn't think about ink, until I started an ink company, and use that for storytelling and marketing. Because I think that we can integrate these sustainable materials and really kind of give these companies an edge to say, let's tell a story about where these molecules came from. They were grown with sunlight, not pulled out of the earth from petroleum. So that's kind of the direction we want to go.
That's cool. I think I've also heard about, you mentioned the shoes made from reclaimed plastic from the ocean. I've seen a lot of apparel or even just construction bricks made out of that style of material. I believe I'm also seeing even shoes made out of algae now.
Yeah.
So
yeah, there's a company called Algae Inks. The brand is Bloom. They're out of Mississippi, actually. But yeah, like they've gotten in with They make kind of an algae-based EVA foam, and they've worked with Viviro Barefoot, Adidas, Newell, New Balance. I mean, a lot of the big shoe companies now have an algae foam shoe. So I bought a pair of those shoes, and when I wear them, to me, it's kind of inspiring to say, like, think about where this came from. Think about how this happened. Think about all the ideas that had to happen and things that had to happen to get this algae into this shoe that I get to wear now. And so I think it's a cool example of innovation, and also really promising from the standpoint that brands are actually adopting these technologies. I don't think 5 years ago it was happening that much. I think there was a lot of resistance. And now, like you said, these brands are saying we got to do things that are sustainable to kind of appeal to our consumer base.
Well, and that is a regenerative brand. That is a brand that can last with time. You're not going to run out of petroleum. You're not going to run out of algae the same way you would run out of petroleum. What I also liked in hearing your story and reading a little on it too was that you're using the byproduct of algae, the downstream, the waste algae. Can you talk for a moment about that and what that looks like?
There's companies really around the world, what we'll call algae farms. So about 12 inches of water, these ponds where the algae moves around, and the algae, like I said, multiply exponentially over time, days, weeks. So some of the groups we're working with, they then harvest that algae like you'd harvest any other crop, although it's a little different because it's in water. They kind of extract their molecule vinches. So some of the groups we work with will pull out a blue molecule for like a natural food product. The remainder of that algae is considered, a byproduct or waste product material. And then we actually, take that waste product or byproduct, depending on who the source is, and we put it through our process. We're also working with a couple groups who are using algae to remove nutrients from wastewater treatment. So tertiary wastewater treatment, they're using algae not for the sake of using algae for materials, but because algae is really good at using nutrients. So rather than having nitrogen or phosphate run off into the environment and cause algae blooms, they actually grow algae on site of the wastewater treatment center.
Because they eat the nitrogen.
Exactly. They eat up the nitrogen and phosphate, and then they grow. But now they have all this algae because they've absorbed so much of this nutrient. So we've actually started to build some relationships with those groups, which we then can take that algae, again, put it into our process. So now we've got this really fully circular economy where, maybe one day you drive in a car from a big car company where, we were actually working with someone that was growing algae off of waste from a car factory. We then took that algae, made carbon black, and then put it into the bumper of your car. So you can start to see how there is this opportunity to have these really nice circular economy stories put together. It does take a lot of work, though, and partners.
Well, and I think a lot of the technology you're talking about, a lot of the research, a lot of the funding behind algae growers came initially because there was so much funding from the government looking at petrochemical replacement, right? They were trying to get fuel out of algae. It's interesting because government funding for something to replace gasoline, which was a petrochemical, I guess that gas was going to be more expensive. Other technologies have kind of erupted around it. And it looks like perhaps hydrogen fuel cell cars and electric cars may be the wave of the future as opposed to gasoline-dependent vehicles. So then all these researchers pivoted from looking at this fuel application. So what else you can do with algae? And the applications are kind of crazy. I've seen 3D printing with algae in different colors where you can make models out of it that look just like plastic. I think you mentioned packaging earlier. I was thinking about a standard supplement bottle, and I don't think we're quite there yet, but it's on the horizon, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think part of our technology comes into play a little bit because when you would try to make a fuel or you try to make a plastic from algae, you do have these byproduct streams. And this is where we come in, where we're our colors project is pretty sexy in terms of using nature and colors. The bio-based black is a little bit less sexy in the way we're taking these waste streams and putting it into, these different processes that we've developed. So you're exactly right. I think there's a ton of potential. And I think that there's been a lot of incremental breakthroughs with some, much larger breakthroughs. The whole point of what we've been trying to do is having people grow more and more algae and then also be able to make it economical. So using every fraction of that algae, whether it's the blue molecule or us making a bio-based black, or maybe even making kind of an algae-based plastic for a cosmetics bottle in the future, I think it is actually starting to come together. And I think fuels, you're right, was the starting point. It's just that fuels it's such a large market and it's such a low margin industry with so much kind of volatility that fuels was probably not a great place to start. And that was always, my mission is I want to make algae-based products that people can experience, that are tangible, that actually can make an impact because they are cost effective. So that's always been my mission. But I think you're right. I think that as time goes by, we'll start to see more and more products coming from algae.
Yeah, it's so interesting to see as an entire marketplace. And, that initial funding largely did come from governmental agencies and energy commissions and things like that. And now, we're just continuing to discover what we can do with it. I love the innovation of also growing algae to deal with waste treatment plants. I mean, that's so awesome. Just lovely to see.
When we started this conversation, like my experience was working with these algae blooms down in the Gulf of Mexico. And so why not try to capture those nutrients at the location rather than let them get into our ecosystems, whether it's the Mississippi River or the Gulf? So it just makes total sense. Again, you're spot on with these brands and consumers starting to kind of drive the conversation a little bit more rather than just nickels and dimes and things like that. So I'm more hopeful than ever. And I'm usually a skeptic. So that's good.
Well, it's good to wear that skeptical lens. Now, obviously, I mean, you started this company from kind of a wild idea and you've come a long way already. But I wonder if you had the ability to go back to your younger self and give yourself advice, what would it be?
I think the one thing that I've been learning is there's this combination of hard work and luck. And so we've been lucky in a lot of ways. And I think we still need a lot of luck to do what we want to do. But I think the one thing that I have been learning is just if we put in the work, good things will happen. And I think that when I was younger, I don't think I realized it that much, but I think I was always anxious. And I think now, like, there's always going to be anxious moments when you're trying to build a brand and a company. But just by like continuing down this methodical path of like working hard and just keep going, good things will happen. And like every week here, I always say there's like 3 things that could have gone better. And there's 3 things that, we're amazed that it happened. And so, just, keep going, keep your head down and don't get too lost in, as you said the other day, like seeing that mountaintop. Like I dream all the time, but I know that like there's some times I don't even know how to get there. I just know where I want to get to. And it's been amazing on my journey how many times there's just been these like fortuitous, like, I don't know how we're going to get there. And then like a month later, like a huge breakthrough happens. Like, oh my gosh, we're there, So yeah, I think for me, it's just been hard work and consistency of showing up over now, which is years, which is crazy. That's been, it seems like it hasn't been that long.
7 years. How many rounds of funding have you had?
We've raised some grant funding, about $1.5 million from grant funding. And then we just raised $2 million from private investors to kind of help scale up and really fulfill on some of these larger commercial orders that we're getting. So we bootstrapped it a lot. Like I said, we did a crowdfunding campaign with that Growing Ink, which was the original kind of got us kind of off the ground a little bit. We went around and were scrappy, winning like business pitch competitions for like $4,000 and putting it together. So we've been pretty scrappy, which is good. And now I kind of have to get out of that mentality a little bit because, now our time is becoming more valuable than maybe it was 7 years ago when we were grad students and just kind of figuring things out. So for me, that's been a learning thing of, hey, like, let's not spend time building this machine. Maybe we should just go out and buy one and save ourselves some time. So,
yeah, if the solution can be repurposed from something else. I mean, who knows? Maybe there's like some chocolate manufacturing machine you can use or something.
Yeah, we're still very creative. But even like one of my teammates the other day said, I'll go drive this over to our customer. And I just said, 3 years ago, I would have said, yes, let's do that. Now I'm like, let's get UPS pick this up because we got things we got to do. So yeah, just learning how to be, more efficient. But, it's just phases of business and we're in a phase of business. And hopefully if we chatted in a year, we'll be in a whole different phase of business. So.
Yeah. No, I think offline, one of the things you said is with your co-founder, you just wanted to be sure you were each learning something every day. So I wondered if you could talk about that for a moment, just like the purpose when you started it and what keeps you going when it's tough.
One of the things that really took the pressure off of us early on was we were kind of entering that startup world. And a lot of that startup world is, I'd say there's a lot of hype and a lot of excitement and dreams. And, everyone talks about how Apple was started or Microsoft. And so there's a lot of that in the startup world. A lot of my friends that I'm friends with in the startup world, it's not stories like Microsoft. It's like long years of grind. Not that they didn't grind, but that it's just slow growth and troubles all the time and things like that. So, early on, rather than thinking about an exit or all these amazing things that could happen to us, we just said, the number one priority at the business in our kind of collaboration together is to just learn something every day. And if we learn something every day, whether that's through failure or successes, and over 7 years, you'll have a good knowledge set. And I think that, we've had that mentality ever since like the second week of starting the business. And now, yesterday I was in the production facility and we were going through some things and it's just like, hey, we're learning. This is good. This is good. And I always tell my team, like whenever there's a challenge or something didn't work, I'm like, this is amazing. We get to figure out why this didn't work. And, in a couple of weeks, it'll be working, which we've had that track record. So we can feel confident saying that. So that took a ton of pressure off. And, we don't think about the exit. We don't think about, how we are in 10 years. We think about, let's learn something today. Let's learn something next week and good things will happen.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm learning in graduate school as I go through entrepreneurship classes for my MBA, right? So it's a grind. It can be a grind. I mean, one more quarter left. Kind of can't wait, right? But one of the things that we talk about is the fact that businesses founded with co-founders tend to be more successful, or they tend to survive that business phase before failure where, a company suddenly, just gives up and goes home. I wondered if you could talk about how you essentially came to say, we as two people are going to do this, and then what that's looked like over the years. Because, you're 7 years in now.
My co-founder and I, we went to grad school together. We met our first day of grad school at a chemistry class. And I met him and I just said, I like this person. I think this person's smarter than me, which I always want to work with people who are smarter than me and super motivated. And, we worked next to each other on our own research projects in grad school. And we were always just kind of like, we both wanted to start a company really to make an impact. It's never been about the money. It's always been about how do we compete in a petrochemical industry with bio-based materials. And so we used to walk by each other in the hallways. Our goal was to come up with like one idea every single time we saw each other. And it would be the most off the wall ideas, like a water bottle that you can put coffee in the bottom and, all these. And we just said, if you do that every day, like you're bound to come up with something at some point, no matter who you are or what you're doing. Right.
Of course.
So, after years of really bad ideas, I thought of this idea in the greeting card aisle of like, hey, we can make pigments from algae. We can make ink and we can do these things. And, he kind of was like, I'm not wrapping my head around this. I don't really know what you're talking about. And I was just excited because I'm like, this is something. I think there's something here. And so we joined an accelerator program at Colorado State University that was like 101 entrepreneurship. Like, what's a patent? What's an LLC, right? And it's also daunting at first. And, what we've learned is like every week is a little bit uncomfortable, but that means that we're learning something and we're pushing ourselves. And so stuff that we thought was daunting 7 years ago, like how do you start an LLC? To me now, I'm like, that's 5 minutes and like $15 in the state of Colorado. It's not that big a deal. So I think that that's been kind of fun. It's kind of overcoming those mental hurdles of like, oh, that's so complex to do that. It's like, no, you just got to do it. And, my co-founder and I, we're so aligned at like, we just do it. We strategically plan and then we just put our head down and we do it. And so that's kind of what got us going. And it's just been really fun because looking back, it's not daunting. There's daunting stuff right now, but the stuff we were doing it's not daunting anymore to us. But until you do it, I don't know how you learn it.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like a very creative process. I wonder what you think he'd say about you. You said he was smarter than me, right? Like I knew he was smarter than me. And I like to surround myself with people who are smarter than me. I think that's a good way to live. It keeps you humble. But what do you think he'd say about you?
That's a good question. I should ask him after this. But, I think that, I think one of my strengths is just like working with people. I think throughout the years, I've had a lot of different jobs in a lot of different industries. And I think one of the things I really enjoy is being with people, different types of people, and embracing that. So, I think he would think that I'm probably, hopefully, relatively easy to work with and flexible and creative and open-minded. I think are some of the strengths that I have with him. But, the other morning we were on the phone. I had to step out of my house because we have such a small house. But at 4:45 a.m., we were on the phone just talking. And, it's just one of those times where you're just going like, this isn't even like work. Like, this is a friend of mine who we're like doing this together. And it's just like challenge that we both want to succeed, And so I don't think we would be where we are. And I don't even know if Living Ink would be a company if it wasn't for having a co-founder that we could really kind of like, when I'm high, he's low and just kind of balance each other out, And so hopefully that's what he would say about me, that I'm easy to work with.
Well, I think you leave a really strong impression in a very good way. And that's just me to you. I mean, I met you a few years ago and never forgot. So,
thank you.
It's the, I think it's the creativity of what you're doing. And also your enthusiasm it's contagious, and that's going to help you be successful. The reality is it's just an incredible idea.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. The other thing that's interesting, I hadn't really heard about co-founders, companies being more successful, but, in some ways it makes sense because like we wouldn't go down this path if we didn't have all of these passions, whether it's sustainability, having an impact, starting a business, challenging ourselves. Like we have these common interests. But our first kind of seed funding that we ever got from a local partner here in Colorado, we had known them for the year, so they knew us. But what he said to me when he said yes to our investment was just like, I've never met anyone that's like so passionate about what they do. And so I think when you start something, you either start it and you go, this isn't for me, or you kind of go, yeah, like I'm going to do this. And then, 7 years later, you're like, I'm deep in this. Like I'm passionate about it. We are doing it. We're learning every day and we've got this big vision. So that kind of makes sense that co-founders and founders have some success there.
Yeah, well, I've been thinking about it a lot. And I think one of the things that probably makes them more successful as kind of the secret sauce that lies under it all is something you alluded to when you were telling the story of the founding of Living Ink. You had to convince him that it was an idea worth spending his time and energy on. At first, he wasn't seeing it. And so now essentially you have a check and balance in place, someone who quite possibly has different strengths than your own, but also that can be a reflection and that can check your wild ideas for actual feasibility, right?
Yeah, definitely. Both technically, business-wise, and just kind of emotionally, right? We both have young kids. We both bought houses. It's just like we're going through the same types of things. So yeah, I think that's been, when you start your own business or organization, that's part of the fun part is you get to kind of pick who you work with. And, ideally, we all want to work with people that we get along with and we work well with. So
that you enjoy working with.
So you look forward to going to work. And there's never a time that I've ever had a call with him or anything that where I've dreaded or I've been like, oh, that was terrible. It's always been like, hey, here's my problem. And then he's like, hey, here's 3 solution ideas. And I'm like, thank you for those because I was not thinking that way,
Yeah, that's really great. Well, I'm happy for you. I think that's tremendous. I would love for you to just have the floor for a minute. If there's anything you would love to share, perhaps a question I didn't ask or something that you would just like to leave the audience with.
Yeah, when you and I talking a little bit before this, just what kind of was in my head was just how do you even start? It was something I was thinking about. When you see these huge companies, like how do you even, or even small companies, like where do you start? And I think that once you kind of have that vision, just got to start. You just got to do it, and this is like very random and, I'm not sure if it even relates, but I just was thinking about like when I was in graduate school, and I started to kind of have this realization that people are what make the world work. Like ideas are great, technology is great, patents are great, but like it comes down to people and decisions within brands and within printers and within, all these different things. So it's always like my journey with Living Inks, it's always been about people. When I look at like what moved the needle of success, it's always about somebody. It's never about this major technical breakthrough. I mean, that helps obviously, but there's a lot of great technologies or ideas out there that just never get there because whether it's the founders or the, stakeholders don't get there. So one is it all comes back to people. But the other thing is like, I remember when I was in the basement of plant sciences at Colorado State University. And I decided like, I'm going to make my LinkedIn account because like I'm starting to realize people are kind of people are who hire you. People are how you get jobs and things, right?
Yeah.
And I remember like signing to LinkedIn and it was like, it came up with like, here's some people you might know. And it was like my one roommate from college and like my dad or something, And I was like, wow, like I'm in this basement in grad school. No one really cares about what I'm working on right now. I don't really have a network. And I just remember at that point, like I'm going to click yes to be whatever, connect with my roommate and yes, connect with my dad. And I got 2 connections. And I just said, this is going to be a fun journey. Hopefully decades and decades of a career where I get to build a network and go into different industries. And so I just kind of looking at that mountain going, where do you start? And it's just, you got to start somewhere, put the ego aside and say, I'm going to do it, and with Living Ink, like I always kind of have to remind my co-founder, like when we hire a new person or we're working with someone who's maybe not as experienced us in this kind of startup world, like where we were when we started, like we gave terrible pitches when we first started, like at business pitches, it was a good idea and it was cool. But like when I look back at the graphics or whatever, I'm like, that's terrible. But like, how are you ever good at something if you've never done it? So I think putting that ego aside, is something that I told myself early on. It's like, you can't have an ego. We got to get feedback because feedback's the most valuable thing that we can get right now. And I don't care if that person thinks I am terrible at what I do. Maybe I am, and that's fine, but I'm going to get better every day. Like we, talked about throughout this episode. And 7 years later, like I feel very comfortable going on stage or going and give put together a presentation. So just starting somewhere and just knowing that, hey, you got to just go, you just got to start it and every day just work on it. So that's my random thoughts of of my journey.
It's the grind.
It's the grind. And
right?
this whole overnight success story and startups and $1 billion unicorns and stuff like that, like it's fun to read about. It's good reading. I don't know many people that said that was really easy and fun and overnight. Like, everyone I talk to in my network, it's almost like therapy for each other to say, how's it going? Like, oh, here's my challenges. And like no matter what industry you're in, if you're doing a young company, a lot of it's the same challenges, trying to get customers to adopt what you're doing, try to get through trials and things like that. So I'd like to talk to some of my friends in the startup world to kind of make sure that, keep me balanced of like everything I'm doing is normal. I'm not missing anything. It's just, like you said, it's the grind.
It's a grind, and it may not differ that much from industry to industry.
Exactly. Yeah.
I think also it's important to keep in mind that those $1 billion stories, they don't necessarily tell you about the time before they got that big funding round. They almost position the story in a very particular light in order for it to be crowd consumptive, right? Like, oh, well, this is a great story and it's inspirational. The story behind that is often and usually that there was a lot of grinding behind it.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of crazy stories to get off the ground or keep going. So I agree. And I think that I've kind of validated that with, like I said, with my own kind of network and stuff of just, it's just hard work. And I think that everyone would agree on that, no matter who the founder is.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I just want to thank you so much for sharing your story with our community here. I really appreciate what you're doing to help reduce our reliance on petrochemicals and plastics and, hey, build a better world with something that's regenerative, renewable, and abundant like algae, right?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. And thanks for doing what you're doing, which is sharing great messages to the world. So thank you.
Yeah, stick with me for just a minute. Now, I'd like to invite you to act. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to feel like a Herculean effort. You don't have to create the next ink replacement company. But it could be as simple as sharing this podcast with people in your community or those that might be inspired by the story we're telling. So to find suggestions, you can always visit our action page, as I shared with you guys at the beginning of this call. You'll find causes and companies that we encourage you to support. And I invite you to join the conversation. Be a part of the community we're building. Tell us what you think, what ideas you have for how we can build a better world. You can find us on social spaces at Care More Be Better, or just send us an email to hello@CareMoreBeBetter. I want to hear from you. Now, if you like what we're doing, you can support the show just by sharing it with your friends. Like, subscribe, comment, give us 5 stars. Thank you, listeners, now and always, for being a part of this pod and community, because together we really can do so much more.
Thanks for listening to Care More, Be Better, a podcast for social good. To make sure you never miss an episode, subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to podcasts, and share with your friends to help us reach more people and spread more social good.